shortly after that, and I had this meeting with the CIA director, and one of the president's friends came to my house, and this was a very disturbing story. I'm sitting at the table with my 4 kids, and this man, who's very close friends with the president, Clinton, says to me, well, they're very supportive of what you've recommended in this white paper. I said, great. And he says, they're convinced that if the president steps into this too hard, he'll end up like Jack Kennedy. And he stopped me. He says, no, they're serious. I said, well, don't say this in front of the kids. So we went to the library in my house, and I said, what are you talking about, Kevin? And he said, they really think this is too dangerous. I said, well, what am I supposed to do? What am I, chop liver? And he looked at me, and he says, yeah, you're expendable. These guys, the folks who have enormous political power and corporate power, even the ones who support this very avidly, and there's a lot of them, they don't want to stick their necks out.
But I'm confused. Okay, why would they kill Bill Clinton if Bill Clinton came out and said that we may have evidence that there might be some intelligent life out there in the world?
Because if that happens, when that happens, if the president doesn't have control access over these projects, then it shows the fact that our democracy has been sidelined, as Eisenhower warned us. I mean, the reason Eisenhower was not anti-military. He was a 5-star general.
For folks who don't know the story, just fill people in on the speech that he made as an active sitting president leaving.
Yeah, the last day of his presidency, he basically said, beware the military-industrial complex. And this is
the dangers.
And he said the dangers of this enormous power will be a threat to our democracy and our way of life. Now, the reason he said that is that between 1954 and 1961, when he was leaving office, it was on his watch that the military-industrial complex reorganized under the Rockefeller Commission of 1956, and Eisenhower lost complete control over these projects. I have a lieutenant colonel who was on the plane with Jack Kennedy flying to Berlin when he gave the I Am a Berliner speech. And Jack Kennedy was talking about this UFO issue, but he turned to this guy who was kind of the chief steward for Air Force One, and he said, I know about this, but the whole matter, this is the President Kennedy saying this, the whole matter is out of my hands, and I don't know why. This guy was stunned. In fact, I'll tell you, there's a kind of a gruff colonel, Air Force guy who was crying as he told his story, because it hit him that there had been sort of a silent coup d'etat on this issue. And one of the problems in Washington when I meet with people who are part of powerful committees and politicians is that they're kind of viewed as placeholders that come and go. The mainstream media is really bread and circus, where they just want people to be entertained with shock and drivel. The question becomes, how are you going to get this story out? And that's why I went to these powerful people. I went to the UN. I went to the British government, the Ministry of Defense. And basically none of them doubted this was all true, frankly. This is what people need to understand. There was no laughter in the room. They took it very seriously. But they didn't want to stick their necks out. And a friend of mine who's a big business guy, he said, well, the way the world works now, everyone wants to be first to be second when it's something tough and
I've always felt that something along the lines of alien contact, if they did have information, there's no reason to let people know unless it's unavoidable. I always felt like unless they were just going to try to do some damage control and redefine what's happening, I wouldn't think that they would ever come out about it. It just doesn't seem like it would be something that would be advantageous to just start telling people about UFOs. The idea is always that the government is our daddy and that our government's looking out for us. But
right.
The evidence points time and time again to that's horseshit, and that's not really what's going on.
But my military advisor made the point years ago that because so many people, between 5 and 10% of the public have seen one of these objects, many of them at very close range.
Let's get back to that.
We have multiple pilots for commercial airlines and the Air Force. And this is one of the really great cases we have, by the way, the Japan Airlines case over Alaska in the 80s. And the guy who was in charge of investigations for the FAA, who was third from the top during the Reagan era, he actually left that agency and brought the originals with him and gave them to us of the radar tracings of this thing that was the size of like 10 747s moving in a nonlinear way over the skies. It was on civilian radar, it was on military radar. They scrambled F-16 jets. It was on their radar, and the Japan Airlines 747 pilot has testified to it, and we have all of that in this case.
I've
Now,
heard of this.
All right.
Story.
So when we brought all that forward, and this guy came forward, he says, "I'm one of these high-level government officials who actually has seen all this and has handled it." But no one's asking the right questions. So when you pull all that together, and then, of course, there will be events like this thing that happened in Phoenix, where eventually the governor of Arizona, Fife Symington, came out later. I mean, at the time he ridiculed it, but he had actually seen it and came out later, 10 years later, in 2007, said, "Yeah, that was an ET craft almost certainly, and I saw it, and tens of thousands of people in the Phoenix area saw it, and it was photographed, and it was on radar, and there were very trained people." So, you have to ask the question, how many things like that have to happen? And, on the other hand, the things that we have in physics that are inferred through indirect measurements, like black holes, are articles of belief and faith, or even the Big Bang Theory. But when you have all of this, and this is not just someone on Hollywood Boulevard who's making stuff up, when you have dozens, thousands of people, you have radar cases, you have all this. And so a lot of this is what's going to be in the film Sirius. And because what I've said to people is that the fact that people haven't seen this evidence doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It does exist.
But
I agree with you. There are a lot of people who will see things, and it'll be a planet rising, or it'll be a meteor, or it'll be
military aircraft,
a satellite, or it'll be now this is the other part of this. There are a lot of things that are UFO sightings that are very legit, and that's why I don't like the word UFO. There are two categories of UFOs that once you eliminate all the nonsense you're talking about, and there are the ones that are ETVs, which is what they're called, the NSA, extraterrestrial vehicles, and then there are the ones that are the electromagnetic devices we've been building since the 50s. And if people think that propulsion and energy systems stopped in the 40s, they need to think about this. Let's step back for a minute. Your car is running on an internal combustion engine circa, that's 1930s.
Right.
Rockets, 1940s, Werner von Braun. Do people really think there have been no breakthroughs in energy physics and propulsion since the 40s?
People absolutely know that we've been working on things like that. But to bring up what you brought up earlier about the governor of Phoenix, just to point out that the governor of Arizona, the governor of Alaska, Sarah Palin, is one of those people that believe the Earth is less than 10,000 years old. So just because you're a governor or something doesn't mean you're on the ball. And second of all, I had friends that were in Phoenix, and one of them, very credible guy, told me he saw some giant black triangle flying motionless over the sky. He said it was bigger than several football fields. He said it made no noise, and it blocked out the stars and flew over. And he said everyone in his neighborhood was shitting their pants. It was enough to me that I would go, wow, there's something. There's too many people that saw something.
Sure.
You could attribute certain things to mass hysteria, but that was one of them that I found to be very strange. But I never heard any photographs. You say photographs.
Oh, we have amazing photographs and videos. They're going to be in the film, Sirius.
You don't have them anywhere else that anybody see online? You're holding them back for
No. They're out there. Dr. Lynn Katai, who's a medical doctor, also took some of them. There's other video.
Photos of the Phoenix crafts.
Yes, the actual one. Yes.
So what should we, if we want to look for one right now to put in this show right now? We're online. Who does he look for?
I guess you'd go to Dr. Lynn Katai's site. I don't have it memorized.
Spell her name?
Kitai.
Kitai.
Yeah.
Pull that up, Brian, and see what images
and she has
you get
quite
on
a
Google.
few on there. Yeah.
I've never heard that there's been photographs of these things.
Yeah.
What does the photo show?
It shows exactly what people described, a formation of lights that were moving together in a massive sort of V formation.
Right, and the government said that those were flares.
Right, because a couple hours later, when they couldn't contain the news story on this, I was there when this happened, by the way.
You were in Phoenix?
I was there.
Did you see it?
Yeah.
What did you see?
What you just described.
Now,
why was I there?
Why were
That's
you there?
another, yeah. So in March of 97, I'd gone there, and there was a guy who had a digital laboratory who said, look, we'll let you use our equipment and assemble this, and we'll help you. And he'd worked a lot with the military. And so I had collected photos and videos from all over the world and governments from all over the world, which we call the best available evidence. And I was putting it together because in April we were holding a closed briefing for members of Congress who wanted to know. And that's when people like Congressman Dan Burton, who was chairman of the House Government Reform and Oversight Committee, came, and a whole lot of other people from the Pentagon and Vice President's office and whatnot. So I was there when that happened, and someone came running into the lab saying, "My God, while we're here trying, there's this going on," and it turned out it was on the news that night. in Phoenix. Now, interestingly, the national news didn't pick up on it until June. This happened in March, which is very interesting. Why did that get held back? But and so there are so many people who saw it, and this was huge. Whatever this object was, it was not the size of like a 747. A 747, you probably could put dozens of them inside the volume of this thing. It was huge.
I found it interesting that the stories were very similar. It's one of the things that I found most interesting. I watched some stuff online, and then when I spoke to my friend who lives in Phoenix, and he told me what he saw, I was like, wow, you're talking about like at least 6 or 7 people that are telling the exact same story of seeing this exact same sort of thing. Now, these are the images that you're talking about. These are the whatever the red lights that are in the sky. I think the video is probably more impressive. Being that the video shows these things essentially hover for a long period of time, and much longer than really should be attributable to parachutes and flares. It doesn't really make any sense because parachutes and flares, they don't really move that slow. When you watch a guy jump out of a plane with a parachute. The parachutes, they slow your fall down, but they don't make you suspend.
There's a good photograph of it. No, and we know how those kind of flares and but the people who were directly under it, and it moved not just over this part of Phoenix, it moved all the way from outside Flagstaff through the valley and then down towards Tempe.
Now, how did you know about it? You were there working. Did you hear about it?
There was a guy that ran into the lab and who had actually been in the military. He said, "You wouldn't believe what's going on." So I was there that night. And
what year was this?
1997, March of 97.
Yeah.
Now, what's equally interesting, if you look at this, now the Belgian Air Force cooperated with me very, very nicely back in the early 90s and late 80s. You may have remembered there was this wave of things that happened in eastern Belgium where there were these massive triangles that were about 800 feet on each side that were photographed, radar traced, chased by F-16s, and we have all this. And the head of the Belgian Air Force actually showed the radar of one of these objects going from hover to several thousand miles per hour straight up into space, way outside the envelope of any normal conventional propulsion system.
They have a video of this.
Radar of it, and we have this. So the question becomes, how many of these cases do you need to have before you say there's something out there?
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is what the problem is that on this subject, the ridicule around it and the disinformation and the crazy stories that are out there is what dominates.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we've tried to do is get people who have the really good stuff from governments come forward and share it. And this is why, when the Space Agency of France released a lot of their documents after I was having some meetings in France and with some of the senior...
You can't say it both ways. It's either France or France.
Yes,
you got to pick.
Well, it was France when I was there, and when it's here, it's France.
There you go.
And there's an admiral that works with us in France, who's a wonderful guy, and he's an MD and a PhD and an admiral, and he knows all this is very real, and so eventually the French government really, I believe it was about 100,000 pages of documents on all of this, and now since the Disclosure Project launched 10 or 12 years ago, there are 14 countries who've opened up their files. Now, of course, the United States isn't, because the United States is managed differently on this issue. It's a compartmented, unacknowledged special access.
And the former Soviet Union has actually been pretty open more recently, in more recent times, about the possibility.
When it first fell apart, not so much now, but when it first fell apart, we have a great dossier of KGB cases and files, and also military. And in fact, some of the cosmonauts that had encounters with these, I pulled together in 1995 for a meeting with some of our astronauts, like Edgar Mitchell, to have a meeting out here in California. So there are some really solid cases out of the Soviet Union.
Does Edgar Mitchell claim to have had a personal experience?
No. He's just investigated it and has concluded that this is all very real. And he did come with me. I invited him to the briefing we set up for the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the Pentagon. I think it was very interesting for him to have learned that people at that level were shaken to their foundations because they concluded this was all real, but when they made inquiries, they were being lied to and denied access.